Hey guys, tonight we begin with a journey through the bizarre, often bewildering rules of the medieval world. The kind of customs that, from our modern sofas, feel absurd, almost laughable, but once placed into the muddy streets and flickering candlelight of the Middle Ages, reveal a logic born not of comfort, but of survival. Before we settle in, feel free to drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love knowing who's joining this quiet exploration from across the world. Now, dim the lights, let the hum of a fan soften the air, and ease into a world where laws told you what to wear, when to sleep, what to eat, and, most chillingly, who you were allowed to be. You stir awake, not in the comfort of blankets, but from a restless sleep atop a bed of straw, barely softened by a thin woolen sheet. It's barely dawn, and the light from the small opening above your head is dim and grey. You sit up, bones sore, joints stiff, and think, perhaps today you'll try to present yourself a little better. Maybe that piece of fur you traded for at the market, that splash of colour, could offer some dignity. Perhaps if you wrapped it just right, you'd look more like someone of importance, someone above the muck and drudgery of peasant life. But your hopes crumble the moment you step outside. The fur, though modest, is a symbol of ambition. Too ambitious. In your world, appearance is not a playground of expression. It is a controlled display of obedience. What you wear is not simply fabric and thread, but a declaration of class. Laws, ancient and detailed, dictate your wardrobe. These are the sumptuary laws, codes that carve the social hierarchy directly into clothing. If you're born into the lowest class, your garments must reflect that lowliness. You're granted coarse wool, brown, scratchy, always damp. Your shoes, if you own them, are shaped like the feet they cover, blunt, utilitarian, uninspired. Your cloak, if permitted, is colorless and short. But walk into the village wearing something too fine, silk, velvet, even a shade of blue too rich, and the law will not see a mistake. It will see rebellion. To the elite, appearance is a fortress. If a peasant can dress like a noble, even briefly, then the brittle scaffolding of social order begins to shake. Fashion, therefore, is regulated like weaponry. A noble may adorn themselves in silks dyed so brightly they gleam like phoenix feathers. They may wear purple, a color so fiercely reserved for royalty that even owning a scrap of it could draw suspicion. Fur, especially the snow-white elegance of ermine, is reserved for those who can trace their lineage through centuries of titles. And their shoes, curled at the tips like question marks, aren't just ridiculous, they're proclamations. The longer the toe, the greater the wearer. They aren't made for walking, they're made for watching. If you, a dirt-covered farmer, dared to mimic even a hint of that luxury, you'd be punished not just as a pretender, but as a threat. Penalties ranged from fines that could bankrupt your family to public humiliation, standing half-clothed in the square while villagers mock your vanity. In harsher towns, you might find yourself jailed. Imagine rotting in a cell beside rats and thieves because your tunic was dyed a little too red, your hat tilted a little too high. These laws were not merely about appearances. They were tools, economic, social, and psychological. A peasant spending coins on velvet was a peasant not paying his lord. Fashion was theft, not of goods, but of dignity, of the noble right to be seen. So you learn to dress down. You layer yourself in drabness, let your shoulders slump, your eyes lower. You become indistinguishable from your peers, and that's exactly the point. Because in the Middle Ages, your worst crime wasn't theft, heresy, or even disobedience. It was daring to look fabulous when your station demanded misery. And so, your day begins. Not with freedom, but with fabric. Not with promise, but with threadbare resignation. The sun has barely dipped beneath the horizon, and for a fleeting moment, a hush falls over your tiny village. You've returned home after a day of labor, so dull it barely qualifies as memory. Fields plowed until your arms went numb. Chores done until your knees begged for rest. You ease down beside the hearth, its glow faint but comforting, and allow yourself the smallest luxury: warmth. Then the bell tolls. Not a gentle chime, not a village lullaby. A command, loud and final, cutting through the quiet like a blade. You freeze. Your candle's flame flickers, innocent. Your hearth still glows with embers, but the bell says no. The bell says it's time. This is curfew, not the kind that scolds you to sleep, but one that demands obedience for the sake of survival. The word itself, curfew, comes from the old French couvre-feu, meaning cover the fire. A reminder carved into the air every evening. Extinguish the flames, drown the light, and let the dark swallow the world. Not because your well-being is cherished, but because your entire village is a pile of flammable dreams. Wooden walls, straw roofs, hay beds, and too many clumsy hands. One overlooked candle, one forgotten log, and the entire town becomes a pyre. And in the Middle Ages, firefighting wasn't a thing. If it burned, it burned. You prayed it stopped before it reached your house or your children. So, you obey. With a tired sigh, you take a soot-blackened lid and press it down over the hearth. You blow out the candle. Your world shrinks into darkness, pierced only by the occasional creak of your neighbor's home or the sudden shriek of a barn owl overhead. The rich, they don't share your worries. Their houses are stone, thick and proud, with servants assigned to tend the flames and catch accidents before they start. For them, the curfew bell is merely background noise, another rule they ignore with impunity. Their fireplaces blaze into the night, shadows dancing across tapestries and silks, while warm wine flows from goblets held by gloved hands. But you are not them. You are tinder wrapped in skin, and so you stumble through your home like a blind man in a trap. You knock your shin against the bucket, trip over a chicken that wandered inside, and narrowly miss stepping in something wet and hopefully harmless. There's no working by firelight. Not unless you enjoy jabbing a needle into your own hand. There's no reading, your fingers know more letters than your mind ever will. There's only stillness, boredom, and sleep. Forced sleep. Because this isn't a world that believes in nightlife for commoners. The dark belongs to dangers. And to dream is your only escape. The rule, as cruel as it feels, isn't madness. It's a kind of desperate genius. Fires aren't the only things it stops. It halts wanderers and thieves. It keeps drunks from stabbing each other over spilled ale. It tells everyone to stay home, stay quiet, stay small. If you step outside after the bell has rung and a guard finds you, expect a fine larger than your weekly earnings. If you protest, expect worse. Because in this world, your worth is measured in silence and submission. So now you lie there on a straw-stuffed mattress that smells faintly of mold and goat hair, wrapped in a rough blanket woven from wool and regret. You hear the rats in the beams above, chewing steadily through wood and time. You hear your neighbor's snores, separated only by planks and poverty. You breathe shallow, not because you're afraid, but because the air feels thick with rules, and you remember, this isn't punishment for something you did. It's precaution for something someone else might do. One villager's carelessness, and you all pay. So the bell rings, every night, like a mother scolding a village of grown children. Not because you can't be trusted, but because you can't trust anyone else. Still you wait for sleep, eyes open in the dark, thinking of warmth, of fire, of a world where rules aren't measured in ash. But tonight, like every night, the law wins. The embers die. The candle is out, and the darkness settles over everything, thick and cold, like another layer of law. Morning comes, not with songbirds or sunlight, but with the gnawing ache of hunger. Your stomach growls before your feet hit the dirt floor. You've dreamt all night of roasted pork, thick slices of beef, or even a scrap of bacon, anything rich enough to satisfy the craving that's lived inside you all winter. But dreams are cheap. Today is Friday, and that means no meat. Not just because you can't afford it, though that's often true, but because the church has spoken. Today, like nearly half the days on the calendar, flesh is forbidden. Friday, like Lent and Advent and an ever-growing list of holy observances, demands abstinence. Not from sin, mind you, but from sausages. Instead of the feast your body begs for, you're greeted by the usual suspects: a wedge of salted herring, stiff as a plank, maybe a scoop of cold barley porridge, perhaps a pickled eel if someone traded well. Meat is sin today. Fish, somehow, is virtue. The priests say it's about discipline, about taming the body to lift the soul. Sacrifice, they whisper, is good for you, and perhaps they're right. But there's another reason hiding behind the robes and incense: survival. Cows don't grow on trees. They pull your plows, give your milk, offer their hides. Killing them casually, whenever hunger stings, is a recipe for collapse. You slaughter too many now, and by winter's end, there's no one left to till the fields. So the church steps in, not just to save your soul, but to stretch your supplies. A holy fast, they call it. A holy ration, more like. It works, in a grim sort of way. Fishing booms. Monasteries rake in coin from selling smoked trout and barrels of preserved cod. Even peasants learn to make the best of it, though best is generous. You chew on dry fish that stinks of salt and mud and tell yourself it's for the good of the realm. You pray the bones don't catch in your throat, and you try not to think about the cow in the shed behind your house. Plump, tempting, and legally untouchable. The wealthy, of course, play by different rules. Nobles enjoy sturgeon or artfully shaped almond pastes designed to mimic forbidden meats. They host fish feasts that look more like celebrations than penance. Even their fasts taste better than your feast days. You watch them and wonder if heaven really requires such extravagance. And yet, people cheat. In alleys, behind shuttered windows, over clandestine fires, chickens are roasted and pork is stewed. Smugglers sneak meat into town, wrapped in cloth, hidden beneath vegetables. Some get away with it. Others pay dearly. If caught, you face public penance. That means standing barefoot in a cold church for hours, while the whole village stares at you like you've brought damnation to their doorstep. Fines follow, sometimes ruinous, and always the shame. But beyond the misery lies an unexpected truth. These rules shape the entire economy. Fishing towns thrive. Markets pulse with dried cod, pickled herring, and eel pies. Creative cooks learn to wring flavor from lentils and oats, and peasants, even while grumbling, manage to feed themselves through the lean months. Still, no law, no priest, no divine decree has ever made herring taste like ham. That's the real tragedy. As you chew through another mouthful of salted scales and whisper your grace, you're not just praying for forgiveness, you're praying for bacon. The stew bubbling in your pot is a thin, watery thing, flavored mostly by hope and resignation. It's cabbage again, because of course it is. You haven't tasted meat in days, maybe weeks, and the onions you're boiling for flavor are more green than white. You push the bowl away, not because you're full, but because you're tired of eating like survival is a sin. And then you see it, a rabbit, plump and oblivious, hops lazily across the edge of the woods behind your hovel. It's the kind of animal that looks like it was born for roasting, tender, juicy, already seasoned by your imagination. You feel your hands twitch. A quick throw, a snare from your pocket. And dinner changes from boiled sadness to something worth remembering. But you don't move, because that rabbit is not yours. It belongs, like everything else in this cursed forest, to your lord. The trees, the deer, the birds in the sky, all of them are his property, and by extension, off-limits to you. This is not wilderness. It is a private game reserve, a playground for nobles, and a prison for the poor. If you so much as look at that rabbit too long, you're flirting with poaching, a crime the courts treat with the same seriousness as treason or murder. And the punishments? They range from ruin to nightmare. A fine you could never afford. Public humiliation in the town square. A hand severed from the wrist downward. In some places, they hang you from a tree for the crime of hunger. Imagine dangling from a noose while the same rabbit you tried to catch sniffs your boot on its way home. It sounds extreme until you understand what's really being protected. The noble's right to hunt isn't just about food. It's about symbolism, power, dominance. A lord riding through the forest with hounds and a bow isn't feeding his family. He's staging a performance. Every arrow loosed, every stag brought down is a reminder that this land is his, that this world is his, and that your place in it is at the edge, watching. And yet, hunger is stubborn. So people risk it. They sneak into the woods at dusk with snares, clubs, or little more than desperation. They set traps, whisper to each other in the underbrush, and pray they won't be caught. Some villages even organize secret group hunts, slipping into the darkness like ghosts, returning with rabbits or pheasants that are eaten quickly and remembered forever. Getting away with it brings pride. Getting caught brings ruin. The irony, of course, is cruel. While you're dodging patrols to snag a single hare, nobles are slaughtering hundreds of animals in grand, wasteful hunts. Not to eat them all, heavens no, but to impress each other. Deer carcasses are piled high like trophies. Swans are served with their wings intact for drama. Wild boars are skewered just so guests can marvel at the spectacle. You, meanwhile, chew cabbage until your jaw aches. So you lower your eyes, pretend the rabbit wasn't there, and walk back to your stew, where disappointment simmers with the vegetables. You feed your children first, because that's the only reward you get. You take the smallest portion for yourself. And as you lie down to sleep, your stomach empty but your hands intact, you remind yourself, survival isn't about courage. Not here. It's about remembering that even the forest knows who's allowed to eat. You're standing in the square, breath caught in your chest, as the town crier finishes shouting your name. Everyone turns, everyone stares. You've been accused of stealing a loaf of bread. Whether you did or not doesn't really matter. What matters is what comes next. Because in the Middle Ages, justice isn't built on truth, evidence, or even reason. It's built on spectacle. It's built on fear. And most of all, it's built on God. Here, innocence is not something you prove. It's something you survive. Welcome to trial by ordeal. The process is as crude as it is terrifying. You won't see a jury. You won't hear arguments or witnesses. Instead, the belief is simple. God will protect the innocent. And if you suffer, if you burn, bleed, or drown, well then, clearly, you were guilty all along. You're handed a glowing iron bar. It's hot enough to make the air shimmer. The priest nods solemnly as if this makes sense. You're told to walk 3 paces holding it in your bare hand. Your skin sears immediately. Your flesh hisses. The pain is so instant and complete it steals your breath. But you walk because you must. Then your hand is wrapped in cloth and bound tightly. You are sent home, not to rest, but to wait. 3 days pass. If the wound festers, as it almost always does in this world without antibiotics, without soap, without hope, you're declared guilty. If it miraculously heals, you're free to go. In theory, anyway. Other trials are no better. There's the ordeal by water. You're tied up, thrown into a pond. If you float, you're guilty. If you sink, you're innocent. though you might not survive long enough to appreciate the verdict. The logic behind it, that pure water would reject the body of a liar. As if water can tell the difference between deceit and desperation. Then there's the ordeal by combat. Someone accuses you of a crime. Instead of court, you fight. No, not metaphorically. You literally pick up a weapon and battle your accuser. Winner takes justice. Loser takes shame, pain, or death. It's less about truth and more about strength. And in a world where most peasants have never held a blade, while nobles train from childhood, you can imagine how often divine favor lines up with wealth and muscle. If you're lucky, the local priest might intervene. Some clerics grew uncomfortable with the cruelty and quietly guided the results toward mercy, but not always. The Church, for centuries, stood behind these rituals as sacred mechanisms of justice. That began to change in the 13th century, when Rome officially denounced the practice, but by then, countless lives had been burned, drowned or broken, all in the name of God's judgment, and even as trials by ordeal faded, the memory of them lingered. A warning whispered through generations that truth was a fragile thing, that fairness was not a right, but a coin toss, that justice, in your time, could boil down to how well you held a piece of burning metal. So now, standing in the square, you look down at your shaking hands. You think of your children, you think of bread, and you wonder, when the flames touch your skin, will they judge your soul, or just your luck? Sunday dawns, and it's loud. The bells begin before the sun properly rises, clanging from the church tower like a blacksmith trying to wake the dead. Their echo rattles across the village, bouncing off thatched roofs and sleepy curses. You groan, but you get up. Not because you want to, but because you have to. It's Sunday, and in the Middle Ages, that means church. Always church. If you skip Mass, someone will notice. If someone notices, they'll talk. And in your world, gossip spreads like wildfire. Worse than that, you could be fined, assigned public penance, or shamed by the priest himself, forced to stand barefoot before the altar while neighbors pretend not to enjoy your humiliation. So, you drag yourself out of bed, splash water on your face, and trudge through the mud toward the chapel with the rest of the village, bleary-eyed and silent. The building is cold. The sermon is long, and it's in Latin, a language you do not speak. You sit, you stand, you kneel. You pretend to follow along, mumbling prayers half-remembered from childhood. The priest's voice drones like distant thunder, and you find yourself staring at the same crack in the stone wall you stared at it last week, and the week before. This is how Sunday begins. But here's the twist. After Mass, you're not allowed to do anything. No plowing, no weaving, no mending the roof that leaks every time it rains. No chores, no trade, no repairs. Sunday is not your day, it's God's, and the law says you must rest, which sounds pleasant until you realize what rest really means in your world. You're not reclining on cushions with a goblet of wine and a platter of roasted figs. You're not enjoying music or reading or taking a leisurely stroll through a garden. You're sitting in your hut, cold, bored, and hungry. Your roof still leaks, your children still cry, but lifting a tool could be considered a sin. Of course, the church didn't invent this rule just for piety's sake. Peasants like you work themselves into the grave 6 days a week. Without forced rest, many would simply collapse in the fields and never rise again. The Sabbath is, in its own stern way, an early form of labor law, a commandment wrapped in concern, or control, or both. Still, nobles bend the rule as they please, lords go hunting, servants keep serving, and if something truly urgent happens, a fire, a birth, a death, work resumes without question. But for you, the line is clear. You try to sneak in some weaving, someone will see. Try to fix the barn wall, someone will report you. And soon enough, you're back at the altar, barefoot, ashamed, being told your labor offended heaven. So instead, you spend your Sunday in a kind of limbo. You sit by the fire, if you're lucky enough to have one. You stare at the wall. You nod along to your father's stories, already heard 100 times. Maybe you sneak in a nap, though even that carries its own warnings. Idleness, the priest said last week, invites sin. You think about that as your eyes grow heavy and wonder if there's a single thing you're allowed to enjoy without guilt. Eventually, the day ends. The bells toll again, and Monday waits with calloused hands. But for now, you've made it through Sunday, without working, without sinning, and without anyone dragging you to the front of the church for a lecture about sloth. Congratulations, you've rested exactly as required, without comfort, without joy, and exactly how the law intended. You've had enough. Enough of mucking through muddy fields, enough of cabbage stew and aching hands, enough of being told what you can eat, wear, say, and pray. So you decide to change your fate, not by rebellion, not by sword, but by trade. You dream of becoming something, anything other than a farm hand. Maybe a baker, kneading dough in a warm shop filled with sweet smells. Maybe a blacksmith, forging iron with fire and muscle. Or perhaps a weaver, fingers flying over looms, creating cloth others admire. But dreams, like everything else in the Middle Ages, come with conditions. Because you can't just start a trade, you need permission. You need protection. You need the approval of the most powerful and petty institution in town, the guild. Guilds are like exclusive clubs run by men in expensive cloaks who drink heavily and guard their secrets even more fiercely than their wine. If you want to bake bread, you go through the baker's guild. Want to shoe horses? Farrier's guild. Want to carve spoons out of wood? There's probably a guild for that too. And if you dare to operate without their blessing, they'll ruin you. Maybe not with swords, but with rules, fines, shunning, sabotage. Sometimes even bricks through your windows. Joining a guild isn't easy. First, you become an apprentice. That means years, sometimes as many as 7, of working without pay. You scrub floors, you carry tools, you observe and obey. You're little more than a servant, but it's the only way in. If you last that long, you become a journeyman. That means you can finally get paid, though not much. And you're still under strict rules. You travel, you learn, you try to find your place in a city that doesn't care if you're talented, only if you're approved. And if you want to become a master, that's the final trial. You must create a masterpiece, a perfect example of your craft. It must be flawless, unique, inspiring, and it must be judged by the masters already in the guild. These men are your competition. They are not eager to welcome you. If your masterpiece is too good, they may reject it, not because it fails, but because you threaten the balance. Too many masters, and the market becomes crowded. So they protect their ranks, not always fairly. It all sounds suffocating. And it is. But it also works. Guilds set standards, and standards mean safety, bread that won't kill you, armor that won't crack when it matters. Prices that don't bounce like a drunken minstrel's tune. Within the system, there's order. Outside it, chaos. If you're lucky enough to be accepted, the guild offers you protection, training, and even a political voice. If not, you're just another dreamer hammering at fate with bare hands. You've seen what happens to those who try to go it alone. One man in your village dared to open a cheap bakery. His loaves were fine, his prices fair, but he wasn't in the guild. A week later, his oven was smashed to rubble, his shop painted with filth. The message was clear. Stay in your lane. So you swallow your pride, pick up a broom, and sweep the shop floor. Day after day, year after year, until your fingers blister, your back aches, and you begin to wonder if this is better than the mud you came from, because in the Middle Ages, Following your passion wasn't enough. You had to follow the rules, follow the guild, or be crushed beneath it. You don't own a clock. You've never even seen one, unless you count the rusting iron monstrosity on the cathedral tower, an elaborate decoration with hands you can't read. Time, for you, is not something to track. It's something you are summoned into, controlled by the bells. Always the bells. They ring at dawn, dragging you from sleep. They ring at midday, cutting your work short. They ring in the evening, marking curfew and silence. They toll for births, deaths, weddings, danger, and devotion. In the Middle Ages, bells are your calendar, your boss, your overlord. The bell tower is not merely a structure. It is your master. You could be out in the fields deep into a rhythm with the plow, the ox finally cooperating, when clang. Time to pray. Drop the reins. Wash your hands if you can. Face east. Mutter your devotion. The Lord is watching and the bell has spoken. Back to work. A few more hours of dirt and strain. You feel your back stiffen, your mouth dry, and then clang again. Noon. Time to eat if you brought anything. A hunk of barley bread, hard enough to chip your teeth, and an onion if you're lucky. You chew while squatting in the grass, watching clouds shift and wondering if this is what the rest of your life will taste like. The bells don't stop. They are everywhere and always. Announcing markets, summoning townsfolk, warning of fire, warning of invasion, celebrating saints you've never heard of and calling for fasts you wish didn't exist. You might be miles away, deep in the forest or on the far side of your Lord's land, and still, faint and distant, that iron voice reaches you. It is time. What for? That's not your decision. In your village, the priest, or worse, the bailiff, decides when the bells ring, and you obey. If you're late, people notice. If you leave early, people talk. If you forget to show up to Mass, the bell tattles on you. Bells are the medieval version of surveillance. They watch for you, not with eyes, but with sound. You can't escape them. You rise, eat, work, rest, and sleep according to their command. Even children are raised by the rhythm, crying at the bells, playing at the bells, sleeping at the bells. And you, over time, don't even question it. You begin to think of your life not in hours, but in rings. How long is a day? From the first bell to the last. That's all you need to know. You never ask what time it is. Because in the Middle Ages, time isn't something you own. It's something that owns you. You stink, but then again, so does everyone else. It's the Middle Ages. Scent is less an offense and more a permanent companion. The smell of smoke, sweat, unwashed bodies, livestock, moldy straw. It clings to your clothes, your hair, your very soul. So when, after weeks of scrimping and saving, you finally scrape together enough coins to visit the town bathhouse, it feels like hope. Maybe today you'll emerge a little less like a walking barn. You arrive, eager for heat and water, but the doors are locked. A wooden sign hangs crooked on the wall, closed until further notice. You bang your fist against the planks, not in rage, but despair. Because the bathhouse isn't just a luxury, it's your only real chance at hygiene. But someone, somewhere, decided it was too dangerous. Disease, they say. Plague. Sin. To be fair, the fear isn't unfounded. Bathhouses are not what you imagine. They're places of warmth, yes, but also of gossip, of mingling, of bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder in steamy haze. They're social hubs, sometimes even dens of flirtation, and when syphilis or plague rolls through, people start pointing fingers. Too many naked bodies in one room, they say. That's the problem. And just like that, the bathhouses are shuttered. You're left to fend for yourself, which means hauling icy water from the village well, dragging it home in a heavy pail that bruises your palms. You tip it into a wooden tub, cracked, shallow, cold, and pretend it's a bath. Soap? Rare and costly. Hot water? A luxury that requires burning firewood you'd rather save for cooking. If you bathe at all, it's quick, miserable, and never enough. The rich, of course, don't suffer this indignity. They have private baths, perfumed oils, servants to scrub their backs and dry their hair. They emerge scented with lavender and wrapped in linen. You dry off with a rag and hope the dogs don't mistake you for carrion. And it's not just about health. The church frowns on bathing even when no disease is near. Too much skin, too much pleasure, too much laughter behind closed doors. If you enjoy it, it's suspicious. If it's public, it's sinful. Cleanliness might be next to godliness, but only if it comes with discomfort and guilt. So you return home, skin still itchy, dirt still under your fingernails. You tell yourself no one notices. But they do. Everyone notices. Everyone smells the same, but that doesn't make it less shameful. Your neighbor turns up her nose. Children whisper. A merchant refuses to shake your hand. It's subtle, but it stings. And here's the bitter truth. In the Middle Ages, cleanliness isn't just about health. It's about morality, about control. The town gets to decide when you're allowed to be clean. The church gets to decide if cleanliness makes you impure. And disease decides when everyone gets punished. So you sit beside your cold hearth, scratching your scalp, breathing through your mouth. You try to convince yourself that this is just how life is, that bathing is overrated, that maybe dirt is holy. But deep down, you know better. You've done it. After seasons of scraping and saving, after meals made from roots and regret, you finally have a few coins left over. Not many, but enough for a small indulgence. Something modest, something that says, I may be poor, but I'm still human. You eye a bolt of velvet at the market. It's deep green, soft as a whisper. Or perhaps you consider a silver clasp for your cloak, just enough shine to lift your spirits. You're not asking for a crown, just a scrap of dignity. But the law disagrees. Welcome again to the realm of sumptuary laws, where even your clothing is a matter of surveillance and control. These aren't guidelines, they're mandates. Enforced by roving inspectors and eager neighbors, they're designed to ensure you look precisely as poor as you are. And if you try to climb the ladder with a new pair of boots or a flash of embroidery, expect punishment. You see, in this world, clothing is not just fashion. It is social armor, coded with meaning. Purple is royalty. Velvet is nobility. Fur trims, reserved for those who could name every ancestor back to Charlemagne. You get undyed wool and sagging leather, and if your tunic is too well made or your shoes too finely pointed, someone will notice. Someone always does. And then the questions begin. How did a farmer afford that clasp? Is that silk at the cuff? Did you steal it? Are you pretending to be something you're not? The town official won't care that you just wanted to feel proud. He'll see a threat to the order of things. The fragile ladder of class depends on appearances staying in line. If a merchant and a duke wear the same cloak, how will anyone know whom to bow to? There is fear behind these laws. Fear that the illusion of divine hierarchy might dissolve into mud like everything else in your world. So the wealthy guard their look as fiercely as their land. They need their finery to gleam while yours remains drab. They need to be seen immediately and unmistakably as superior, and the law ensures that. Inspections happen without warning. A man in a feathered cap might stroll through the marketplace, eyeing hems and cloth with sharp judgment. He might tug at your sleeve, measure the length of your coat, ask questions you're not allowed to refuse. And if he finds fault, a fine, public shaming, confiscation. In some towns, a repeat offense might even land you in stocks. Your neighbors are no better. They might tattle out of envy, or boredom, or spite. Watching someone punished for dressing above their place is, for many, the best entertainment they'll get all season. Meanwhile, nobles dress like peacocks. Their robes glitter. Their sleeves trail behind them like banners. Their shoes are so long and curled they need to be tied to the knee to avoid tripping. You watch them glide through church like gods in human skin. And you wonder, what makes them better? Why are they allowed to shine while you must fade? But you say nothing. You fold the velvet back onto the shelf. You nod politely. You purchase another wool tunic in the acceptable shade of misery. And as you walk home, you disappear again into the grey sea of sameness. No shine, no flair, just the quiet knowledge that in the Middle Ages, even dreams of looking better could be a crime. Because here, clothes don't just make the man. They make sure the man knows exactly where he stands. You're hungry again. Not the kind of hunger that comes before a missed lunch, but the dull, constant ache that never fully goes away. It's the Middle Ages, and being hungry isn't a moment. It's a state of being. Today, maybe, just maybe, you'll allow yourself a small fantasy. White bread, soft and airy, like the kind the nobles eat. Or a goose, roasted, tender, its fat crackling in the firelight. You close your eyes. You can almost smell it. Then reality returns, as it always does, wrapped in barley and cabbage. Because in this world, even your hunger is ruled by law. Food is divided not by appetite, but by class. The noble table groans under the weight of swan, pheasant, venison, roast beef, and sugar-glazed pastries. They eat white bread made from sifted flour so fine it barely has weight. They sip sweet wine from glass goblets, laugh with mouths full, and dab their lips with embroidered cloth. You, on the other hand, eat what the law allows. Your bread is barley or rye, so dense and dark it could double as a weapon. Your stew is cabbage, always cabbage, sometimes with turnips or leeks if luck's on your side. Salt is a luxury. Spices are myths, and if you're lucky enough to taste meat, it's usually from an animal that died of something other than natural causes. Why? Because sumptuary laws don't stop at clothing. They extend to the very food you're allowed to buy, cook, or even smell. Certain meats, certain fish, even certain types of bread are restricted by class. If you're caught eating above your station, there are consequences. Fines, shame, and the smug laughter of those who get to feast daily while you're punished for a single stolen bite. And let's be honest, the wealthy aren't worried about fairness. These laws serve two purposes: preserving resources and preserving status. Goose and swan don't breed fast enough to feed the entire peasantry, and the nobility isn't about to give up their favorite dishes. If everyone could eat roast lamb on Sunday, how would the barons feel special? If your stew had flavor, would they still taste superiority? But you're not alone in your dreaming. Whole songs and tales are spun from the fantasy of forbidden meals. Ballads of poor men sneaking into the forest to roast a deer or slipping into castles disguised as cooks. They're stories of rebellion, yes, but also of longing. A single bite of noble food becomes a kind of holy grail. Because in your life, a good meal isn't indulgence, it's magic. Of course, people cheat. Markets have black corners where off-limits food changes hands behind drawn cloaks. A butcher might trade in stolen venison. A cook might sneak goose fat into your stew for the right price. And if you're caught, you're not just punished for the food, you're punished for the idea that you thought you deserved it.
So you sit down again to your bowl of gruel, barley, water, and sadness. Across the field, you see torches flickering in the noble's hall, hear laughter rising through the night. You know they're tearing into something roasted, spiced, sweetened, and served on silver. You chew slowly and tell yourself that taste doesn't matter, that survival is enough. But even as you swallow, your mouth waters, not for the food itself, but for the life that comes with it. Because in medieval Europe, every bite you take is another reminder. Your place is not just written in law, it's carved into your stomach. You cough, just once. A small sound in a crowded marketplace, but the reaction is instant. Heads turn, people freeze. Someone pulls their child behind them. You feel 1,000 eyes on you, all asking the same silent question: are you sick? Because in the Middle Ages, sickness isn't just a personal burden, it's a warning. And your single cough might be enough to doom your entire household. Welcome to plague season. You're not just fighting hunger and cold anymore. Now, you're fighting suspicion. If someone in your house gets sick, if they start sweating, shaking, bleeding, coughing, the authorities don't offer help. They offer nails. Big iron ones, hammered through your front door, sealing you in from the outside. A red mark or cross smeared over the wood tells the world, do not enter. The people inside are contaminated, possibly dying, and you stay locked inside until every last one of you is either healthy or dead. The logic is brutal but clear. One house sacrificed is better than an entire village wiped out. So you watch the door close with dread, knowing that the world won't open it again until it's sure the danger has passed. Outside, everything stops. Markets close. Inns go dark. Weddings, fairs, feast days all canceled. The towns become hushed, shuttered places, full of people who speak in whispers and avoid eye contact. Priests walk the streets murmuring prayers, scattering herbs, and making hasty marks on doors. If you're a gravedigger, things get even worse. You don't get to hide. You work night and day hauling corpses into trenches. No coffins, no ceremony, just pits filled with bodies and dusted with lime. If you refuse, you're punished. If you agree, you risk catching the same illness with every breath. There's no winning. There's only surviving long enough to bury the next one, and forget travel. Entire towns seal themselves off. Gates are barred. Roads are watched. Strangers are treated like wolves, unwelcome, dangerous. If you try to sneak in, you're met not with welcome but with spears and suspicion. In plague times, hospitality dies first. Even if you're healthy, plague warps your life. You ration food, terrified of running out. You sleep with one ear open for the sound of a neighbor coughing. You pray not for blessings but for silence, for nothing, because nothing is safe. But there are moments, fleeting, almost miraculous, where the system works. Some towns, strict and merciless in their quarantines, survive. Others crumble under the weight of panic and superstition. In the end, it always feels like luck. And so you sit in your house, sealed off, staring at your family by candlelight, wondering who will be next, hoping the cough you heard was just a dry throat, praying that the priest who marked your door will return with a blessing instead of a burial crew. Because here, in the time of plague, breaking quarantine doesn't just risk your life, it risks everyone's. And if that means hammering the doors shut, then the town will do it. Even if it's your door, especially if it's your door, you've died. Not today, not dramatically, but eventually, as all people in the Middle Ages do. Perhaps it was illness, perhaps hunger, perhaps simply time. Your life ends not with a celebration but with a whisper and a quiet shuffling of feet. And yet, even in death, the rules do not leave you alone. Because burial here is not about peace. It's about payment. You'd think it would be simple: dig a hole, say a prayer, lower the body. But no. First, there's the question of where you're allowed to rest. If you want to be buried in holy ground in the churchyard, under the protective watch of saints and scripture, you'd better have coin. There are fees for the priest, fees for the grave, fees for candles. If your family can't afford it, your body will be carted beyond the town walls and tipped into a communal pit, shoulder to shoulder with beggars, criminals, and the plague dead. No marker, no blessing, just earth, if you're lucky. And the churchyards, they fill up quickly. Space is precious. After a few years, once the memory of you has faded and your family has stopped paying, gravediggers quietly unearth your bones and toss them into a charnel house. An ossuary, where your skull sits beside dozens of others, stripped of identity. The ground you thought was yours is sold again, recycled for the next soul with deeper pockets. But even that fate assumes you died clean. If you died by suicide, your body is denied sacred ground. You're buried at crossroads, where your ghost won't bother the living. If you were executed for a crime, your corpse might hang from the gallows, a rotting warning to others. If you died of plague, you're shoved quickly into mass trenches outside town, covered in lime. No ceremony, no comfort, just speed and separation. And if you were excommunicated, cut off from the church, your body isn't even allowed near consecrated soil. Your sins don't just follow you in life. They follow you into the dirt. The wealthy, of course, rise even in death. Nobles rest in carved tombs within the church walls, their names chiseled deep into marble, their statues posed in eternal dignity. Some are buried with rings, swords, and even small coins to pay the ferryman of the next world. They are remembered, visited, prayed over. You might get a stone, if your children can spare the cost. But here's the cruelest irony. After a few decades, even the nobles are forgotten. The names fade, the church records are lost, the stones crack and tilt, the stories end. In time, the graveyard itself may be built over, turned into farmland, or simply erased. Because in the Middle Ages, death is not an escape from the system. It is the final reminder of it. You don't just die. You die where you're allowed to, and you rest only as long as someone is willing to pay. And if they aren't, then you are buried, uncovered, forgotten, and buried again, until the earth forgets your name. You're in the tavern, a few mugs into the night, and someone at the next table mutters a joke, something about the bishop's hat looking like it was stolen off a beehive. You laugh, maybe a little too loudly. You don't mean harm, it's just a joke, but the room goes quiet, too quiet, because in the Middle Ages that kind of laughter can cost you everything. Mocking the church isn't just frowned upon, it's dangerous. Deadly, even. This isn't just a place of worship. The church is the most powerful institution in Europe, bigger than kings, richer than noble houses. It owns land, collects taxes, commands armies. It dictates what you believe, how you live, and what happens to your soul after you die. It's God's voice, and you don't laugh at God's voice. So when you snort at the bishop's ridiculous hat, or roll your eyes during a sermon, or mutter something cynical after too much ale, you're not just being rude. You're challenging authority. You're inviting trouble. Punishments range from mild to medieval. If you're lucky, you're fined or made to stand in church barefoot during Mass while everyone stares at you like you farted in heaven. But if the offense is serious, or if someone wants to make an example of you, you could be branded a heretic. And once that word sticks, it doesn't wash off. Heresy is no joke. It's not a misstep. It's a threat. The church sees it as a kind of rot, something that spreads and weakens the entire body of faith. If one man questions too loudly, others might follow. So the solution is swift, severe, and very public. You might be jailed, tortured, burned. The church has no shortage of ways to extract confessions or crush rebellion. The Inquisition exists not to debate but to silence. And even if you repent, the price may still be death, just slower, more ceremonial. After all, you must be made an example of. Even worse, people tattle. A neighbor hears your joke and reports it, not out of piety but out of fear, or spite, or the hope that by turning you in, they'll shave a few years off their own penance. In this world, everyone's watching everyone, and salvation is a competition. Of course, the irony is thick enough to choke on. The very priests and bishops you're not allowed to criticize often live more lavishly than the lords they serve. Some have mistresses, some hoard gold, some dine like kings while preaching humility. You see it, everyone sees it, but to speak of it aloud, that's the sin. So you smile at the sermon, you bow when the priest passes, you murmur your amens with just the right tone, and you keep your jokes locked tightly behind your teeth. Because in the Middle Ages, sticks and stones might break your bones, but words could burn you at the stake. The bell tolls again. Not the call to prayer this time, not the curfew warning. This one is heavier, slower, meant to drag the night across your doorstep like a shroud. You're home, finally, after another endless day of bending your spine for someone else's profit. You've eaten your stew, if it can be called that, water thickened with root vegetables and maybe a hint of meat if luck smiled. You sit by the hearth, firelight dancing across your fingers, and for a brief, flickering moment, you almost feel human again. Then the bell rings. The message is unmistakable. Cover your fire, snuff your candles, the day is over by law. This isn't a request, it's a command. Your hearth must be extinguished, your light put out. The risk is too great. One ember, one overlooked coal, one moment of inattention, and the village burns. Every house here is a pile of kindling pretending to be shelter. Wooden walls, dry thatch, open beams, and carelessness waiting to happen. You don't want to be the one who starts the blaze. So you obey. You shovel ash over your fire even as your hands ache from cold. You curse under your breath softly so the children don't hear. And then the darkness comes, thick and total. Not the warm, velvety dark of restful sleep, but the cold, anxious kind. The kind filled with creaking beams, scratching rats, and the knowledge that outside your door, the night is full of wolves, thieves, and drunk men looking for a fight. The fire wasn't just warmth, it was protection, and now it's gone. You could keep it going, of course, some do. Nobles, for instance. Their homes are stone, insulated, safe. They have servants who manage the flames, chimneys to guide the smoke. They don't have to worry about setting the village alight. They can fall asleep beside a roaring hearth, knowing someone else is watching it. The fire laws don't really apply to them. But your home is the law's reason for existing. And so you sit, wrapped in threadbare blankets, whispering stories to distract the children from the cold. You listen for every sound in the dark, a shutter banging, a cough next door, a dog barking in the distance. All reminders that darkness is not peace. It is uncertainty. It would be easier if night brought rest. But it doesn't. Not really. You lie awake thinking about firewood, about food, about the leak in the roof, about the weight of all the rules that keep you alive but never comfortable. And yet the law works after a fashion. Villages don't burn as often. Fires stay in their hearths. Most nights pass in cold silence instead of screaming. That's the trade. So you sigh, pull the blanket closer, and wait for sleep. Because in the Middle Ages, survival is rarely about happiness. It's about obedience. And if that means freezing in the dark so the village doesn't burn, so be it. You've done your duty. You've suffered correctly. And in this world, that's often the closest you'll get to safety. Exile wasn't just punishment, it was obliteration. To be cast out from your homeland in the Viking Age was more than being forced to leave. It was to be unmade. Stripped of your ties, your name whispered in shame, your place at the fire replaced by silence. That's exactly what happened to Eric the Red. He had blood on his hands more than once. Feuds in Iceland had spiraled into violence, and when the final tally of the dead was too great to ignore, the sentence came down: outlawry. Eric had no home, no kin who could shelter him, no law to protect him. He had only the sea and the stories of a land seen by accident, glimpsed by sailors pushed west by cruel winds and failing sails. So Eric turned his eyes toward the unknown. What he found when he arrived wasn't a green paradise. It was ice, jagged mountains, howling winds, valleys that barely blinked in sunlight before winter returned. It was a punishment masquerading as a new world. But Eric understood something that many others didn't. He knew that names could shape destiny. So he called it Greenland. It was a lie, but it was a brilliant one. A land of ice given the name of life. He painted visions with words: fertile slopes, deep fjords rich with fish, hills ready for the plow. He knew that settlers, cold and crowded in Iceland, hungry and desperate, didn't need certainty. They needed hope, and Eric gave it to them. Back in Iceland, he spun his tale with the zeal of a man who had everything to gain. He spoke of meadows, of farmland, of freedom. And the people listened. By the summer of 985 CE, dozens of families loaded their longships with livestock, tools, grain, and dreams. They weren't conquerors. They were believers, but belief doesn't calm seas. The voyage to Greenland was brutal. Fog smothered the ships. Icebergs lurked like teeth in the dark. Storms rose from nowhere, tearing sails, cracking masts. Some ships vanished, swallowed by the Atlantic. Others turned back. But about 14 ships made it. And what they saw was not the lie they had been promised. It was harsher, and it was real. There were no forests, no broad pastures. The soil was thin, the climate bitter, but it was land, and land was power. Land was freedom, so they made do. They carved homes from turf. They learned to live beneath the ice and sky. And in doing so, they proved that Greenland wasn't a lie after all, not if they made it true. Eric hadn't just discovered a new world. He had created it. One name, one story, one ship at a time. They came to Greenland not for conquest, but for continuity, for the right to live, to farm, to endure. And against all odds for a time they did. They built turf houses, thick-walled and low to the earth, shelters pressed against the wind. They raised sheep and goats, coaxed thin grass from rocky ground and stored hay like gold. They learned the rhythms of a land that gave little and demanded much. Women wove wool into cloth, not just for warmth but for trade. Men hunted seals and walrus, their boats carving paths through ice-choked fjords. Children were raised with the knowledge that survival was the first duty. There were no kings here, only farmers. But they were proud. They carved churches from stone, sent tithes back to Europe, and maintained ties with Iceland and Norway for as long as ships could still cross the sea. And then slowly it began to slip away. The winters grew longer, colder, the hay harvest shrank. Walrus ivory, once the colony's lifeline, was no longer in demand. Elephant ivory from Africa now flooded Europe's markets. Trade faltered, fewer ships came. And each summer, families stood on cliffs, scanning the sea for sails that never arrived. Isolation hardened into silence. Some say there were conflicts with the Inuit, skirmishes over hunting grounds, over seals and fish, and the simple right to live. Others speak of famine so deep that families butchered dogs, then calves, then nothing. Graves grew shallow. Stone churches emptied. The last record from Norse Greenland is not a battle or a sermon or a cry for help. It is a wedding. Joy even in the face of collapse. And then nothing. No one knows exactly when the final hearth went cold, or who was the last to step outside and find only snow, wind, and ghosts. By the time European ships returned centuries later, they found ruins. Collapsed farms, cracked gravestones, bones, but what they also found still standing were walls, turf and stone long abandoned but upright, churches without roofs, carvings still faintly visible, as if the people who once lived there had simply stepped out promising to return. They never did, but their story endured. The Norse of Greenland did not vanish in fire or war. They faded slowly in silence and snow, not because they lacked courage, but because even courage has limits. Their saga ended not with conquest but with endurance, and the quiet truth that sometimes the world is simply too cold. Yet even now, centuries later, the wind that whips across those empty valleys still carries their echo, not of failure but of resilience. Because in one of the most unforgiving places on earth, they built lives, and for hundreds of years they held on.